Okay. Hello, shall I start? Okay, wonderful. Hello to everybody who's online and listening to me. I thought I'll just start off by showing you where exactly in this world I am right now relative to where you are. So I'll just Okay, well, I'll just click to my next slide. So just to give you a perspective, this is where I am and this is where you are right now. We are just a little red dot in this world map, definitely very, very small in comparison to where you are. I live and work from Singapore, but I'm originally not from Singapore. I'm from India, which is here, you can see in the map. And this is the first time I'm speaking to Russian audience, but this is not my first connection with the Russian audience. Yes, so as I mentioned, I come from India, and this is the first time I'm presenting to people in Russia, but this is not my first connection with Russia. I'm brought up in India in a household where my father was in the Indian Army, and a lot of the times the conversations on the dining table were about the war. And every time my father said that, in the war, the country that we could go on war with will be supported by superpower XYZ, I would often get worried and ask him, so who's going to support India? And his answer always was, oh, we have Russia as a friend. So I have grown up thinking of Russia as a friend, and I'm very delighted to be presenting to some of the friends today. And especially when I looked at the map and saw you so big, I thought, wow, we are safe in India. We have a very big friend. So thank you for your time. I'll be talking on change storytelling, and I'm looking forward to making this time worth it. Okay, well, so, I have about 30 minutes with you, and I wanted to make sure that every single minute that I spend with you here online is really something that you can walk away and think about and implement on change storytelling. So here's how we're going to work. I'm going to talk to you about 3 leaders who work for 3 different brands, ran 3 large change initiatives, and I had the absolute privilege of helping them build the change stories. And through that process, I learned 3 big insights about change storytelling that I want to be able to give to you today. Okay, so let's get started. Okay. I'm just trying to move my slide to the next slide. Okay. So here are the 3 leaders I want to introduce you to. The very first one, his name is Moon. He's the CEO of Singtel, which is the Singapore Telecommunications here. He's Singaporean. The second leader I want to talk to you about is Laurent Philipposi. He's French, He lives in Singapore, and he's responsible for running a factory here for Infineon. The third leader that I want to talk to you about is also a friend. His name is Fabrice Thomas. He lives here in Singapore, and he's the vice president for Agilent Technologies. Okay. So just to give you a quick idea about what kind of companies are these. So Singtel is a telecommunication company, a little bit like what Tele2 Russia or Rostelecom would be for you. Infineon is a semiconductor company, a little bit like what Micron would be for you. And Agilent Technologies primarily make lab products. So I think in Russia that would be equivalent to LOIP, LOIP. So these are this is the company that makes products that go into laboratories. Okay. So now these are the three leaders. They work in these organizations. Now they have the task of introducing change in the organization. So Moon's job in Singtel was to introduce a CRM system change. So, you know, a CRM system is a customer relationship management system. Singtel had been going for 20 years with one system. There are 10,000 people who work in the consumer group. His job was to wake up one day and tell everybody, you cannot use what you've been using for many, many years, and you're going to use this new system. How exciting would that be for people? Of course not. Nobody wanted to do it because he was telling them to stop doing what they did and to start doing something completely new. For Laurent's job in Infineon was to tell everybody, the 1,000 people who worked in the factory, that moving forward, our factory would be a smart factory. A smart factory essentially is a factory which is a lights down factory. What that means very simply is that robots will be working in the factory and there will be a lot of automation. Lights down because robots don't need light to work. And for Fabrice in Agilent Technologies, his job was to tell everybody that moving forward, whether that is a procurement system or a supply chain system or a warehouse, we are going to make everything digital. All these leaders had the tough task of telling everybody, we're going to stop doing what we're doing and we're going to start doing new things. Right. So all these three leaders had one thing in common, which was they all knew what needed to be done. But the thing that they were little bit unsure of or finding it a little bit hard was how are they going to make people motivate these people to implement the change. So knowing that you want to change is one thing, and knowing exactly what you're going to change is another thing. But getting people to, be motivated to want to implement the change is a completely another thing. And all these three leaders had that area as an area that needed to be resolved. So when I worked on this project, I developed three insights, which I want to share with you. Okay, so let's get into the three insights. And these insights are all about change storytelling. So you are in a situation where you have to implement a large change in the organization. And I've developed these insights through working on these three projects. So the very first insight I have for you is about purpose worthwhile. So very simply, what is purpose worthwhile? Purpose worthwhile is this. So you walk into your office and you see on the walls there is this big poster that says we are going to make our our factory a smart factory, and everybody looks at it and says, okay, but then what's in it for me? Why should I be interested in this? How do you craft purposes that people feel that there is something in it for them? So it's all about that, and I'll take you through the story now. Okay, so just imagine with me the CEO of Singtel, Moon. He stands up on the stage and he has about 5,000 people sitting and listening to him, and he's going to talk about the change. And he says to everybody that we are losing market share, we work in isolation, and our systems are really, really complex. And that is why we need to change. So our purpose for change is that we should not lose market share anymore. And that is why we are changing. Now, in the same room, I'm seated right at the last row with a telephone operator who works in Singtel. And I asked this lady, do you understand what this person is saying, what your CEO is saying? And this lady says, yes, I do. And then I said, so what do you think about it? And her response is, well, I just don't get paid enough to worry about market share. So, one of my key learnings by working on this project was that the way we create the message for these changes, the message is always very, very important. You have to know what exactly is the purpose before you start building a story. People will only be interested in listening to the change story if you have a clear purpose that has something in it for them. So what I noticed was that no matter which organization I worked at, this is how they spoke about why they are changing. They would say we are losing market share. They would say to continue our operations in Singapore. So Infineon said, if we want to continue our operations in Singapore, we have to change. Agilent said, we have to reduce the time we spend on non-value added tasks. That's why we have to change. So every time the purpose that was built by these organizations is not incorrect, but it's not something that people stand and say, wow, this is purpose designed for me to be successful and I want to be a part of it. Okay, so the key learning here was that when we start talking about the change in the organization, the very first step is to get the purpose right. Before you build the story, you have to get the purpose of the change right. And if you say things like losing market share, or you say things like to continue our operations in Singapore, or you say to reduce the time spent in non-value added tasks are the reasons, are the purpose behind our change, every single employee in the organization turns around and says, it's not something that is designed for me. What we did was we shifted the purposes. We started to say to the people that in Singtel, we are changing so that each one of our employee becomes a trusted advisor. How do they become a trusted advisor? They become a trusted advisor because they then use the new CRM system that gives them insights, and those insights are appreciated by the consumers and are appreciated by the stakeholders. For Infineon, we said it's not about continuing our operations in Singapore. It's about you working in a factory like a factory worker to now becoming a supervisor of robots, because our people in future will become supervisor of robots. And that is such a skill in demand in future. Whether you work in Infineon or you don't work in Infineon, your skill would be so much in demand. You will become the workforce of future. For Agilent, it was not about reducing time in a non-value added tasks. It was about being respected in the organization to be able to provide value rather than sitting and doing analysis of data. You actually give in, the analysis is already done. You attach your point of view and you become respected for the point of view that you bring to the organization. So everything we shifted when we started talking about change in the organizations. Our posters said, our marketing materials said for the change, we are becoming a smart factory so that you can become the workforce of the future. We are changing our CRM system so that you can become the trusted advisor. We are having a digital transformation so that you can be respected within the organization for the work you do. Okay, so our positioning in Infineon to be the workforce of the future was so well liked that the World Economic Forum just last week picked up Infineon as the leader in integrating and applying cutting-edge Industry 4.0 technologies. And the positioning of Smart Factory was actually put in a video by World Economic Forum and published. World Economic Forum recognized the strength of that positioning that Infineon had done. So that's the success you see when you actually craft messages that moves people in the right direction. So basically, what I'm saying to you is that every time you embark on a change in an organization, before even you build the story, you are going to ask yourself this. You're going to ask the people who will help us make this change happen, which is most likely the employees that work in the organization. Can you answer this question for them? What's in it for me that will help me survive and thrive? So everything that you change in an organization, that if you can tell people how this change will help them survive and thrive and what's in it for them, then that's the right positioning. Numerical goals like we want to reach a revenue of XYZ, we want to be number one leader in this industry, do not excite people because it does not help them survive and thrive. Okay, so that's insight number one. Before even you build a story, figure out what's the purpose worthwhile, and in when you build that purpose worthwhile, is it going to help the people survive and thrive? Let's move to insight number two. Okay, so moving on to insight number two. Ooh. Sorry, I'm just trying to move my PowerPoint to the next slide. I'm just having a little bit of a trouble. Okay, so insight number two. Insight number two is this real lack within the organizations to be able to tell a problem story. So now let me explain to you what that means. Okay, so imagine this, right? We will talk about Infineon now. So what Infineon does is they get up and they say to people, we are changing, we are going to build a smart factory, and we're building smart factory because we want to sustain our operations in Singapore. So they got the purpose wrong. And then what they do is they start talking about what we are going to have in the smart factory. They start saying, okay, so moving forward, one of the things we will have within the factory is an AGV vehicle, which is like this robotic vehicle, which will put in stuff in it and move it from one place to the other. So rather than human beings having to do it, the vehicle will do it. And as soon as people start hearing that, they think, oh, so that means the vehicle is going to take over my job and I'm going to be retrenched. So people in an organization straight away start talking about what is the change that is going to happen and what are the things that will be in the organization that will reflect that change. But people haven't even made their mind up that they want to embrace the changes yet. Okay, so what the point here is that stop giving knowledge about the change before making people feel that they want to embrace the change. So do not start going and saying, we have 9 projects in this digital transformation. The 9 projects are going to be, 3 are going to be in the factory, 4 are going to be in the office. That's knowledge. Stop giving knowledge about the change before making people embrace the change. So Instead of giving people knowledge about what the change is going to look like, how many projects are going to be there, how many initiatives are going to be there, what kind of technology will come in, we started with articulating a problem story. So how did we tell a problem story? In Infineon, we told story of this lady whose name is Su Ting. We said Su Ting joined Infineon 25 years ago. 25 years ago, when she joined the organization, her job was to take the semiconductor chips, put them in the trolley, and move them from one area to the other area, which is the assembly point. Now, in one day, she would roughly move about 8 to 10 times back and forth doing this job. Now, 25 years later, because the demand for our product has become 4 times more, she's not just moving 8 times. She's moving 25 to 30 times in a day. It's the same person, but doing so much more. And as a result of that, it is really affecting her performance. Now, what can we do to help her and make her job easy? How can we make sure that Su Ting stops doing this extra manual labor and becomes the supervisor of a vehicle that can do this job? So we had to go and establish a problem story before we started telling all the stuff that we were going to have in the smart factory. So the common, misconception, why do we do this? Why do we make this mistake? We make this mistake in implementing change in an organization because this is how we think change happens. We think we will analyze a situation, we will come up with a solution, and then we'll tell everybody, come on, let's change. So we look at a factory, we think, oh, this factory, people cannot handle the amount of work that is there anymore because the demand for our product has increased so much. So the solution is to make it a smart factory. Then we say, everybody, let's change. Now we're going to make this factory a smart factory. But change doesn't happen like this. So change doesn't happen like this, but change happens like this. When you make people see something, that makes them feel something, and then they get the fire to want to change. So the way you make them feel something is through a story, a problem story. When you tell them a problem story, they will feel it, and then they would want to change, and they will ask you about what's happening in the organization that will implement this change. Okay, so I think the fundamental truth I'd like all of you to kind of understand is that, sorry, I'm just again trying to move the the PowerPoint. Just give me a second. It just takes a little while. Okay, so I think the fundamental truth I want you all to sort of understand is that a lot of us think that we are thinking creatures who can feel, but the truth is biologically, we are feeling creatures who can think. So when you're trying to get people to change in an organization, you must really think about what is it that we can make them feel before we can make them think. So please focus on feeling with a story, a problem story, before you start telling them to think about it. So the insight number 2 is that before you provide a solution to change, you must tell a problem story that makes people want the change. So I'll move to insight number 3 now. Insight number 3 is what I learned after making this mistake several times. The mistake here is that after you've told the problem story and people are willing to change, what you must straight away do is change assistance. So I'll explain to you what that means. So what we started doing in organizations where we were telling the change story in every organization that I've mentioned and many more, we were telling the change story. Everybody was understanding it. Everybody wanted to embrace it. Then we were expecting that after the story, people are motivated enough and the change will happen. But it was not happening like that simply because we were not providing change assistance. What does that mean? So if I go back to the smart factory, as soon as we made people feel that they could become the workforce of the future, what we needed to straight away do was to give them the ability to become the workforce of the future by providing them assistance, which looked like training in machine learning. In Singtel, what we learned was after we told the change story, what we straight away needed to do was to give people an ability to learn the new system. So if you, after you've told the problem story, you straight away don't give them an assistance to change, you will never mobilize your change. So it is really important that as soon as you finish telling the change story, you actually provide change assistance on the spot where people sign up and they actually show enthusiasm to want to change. Okay, so that's the insight number 3. So I'll just do a quick revision. So if we have a look, I'll move the slide again and hopefully it'll move quickly. Okay. So, sorry. Go ahead. I'll wait. Okay, all right, wonderful. So basically, if I look at this, after doing change several times, what I have learned is that I could decode this entire process into these 8 simple steps. What I went through today with you was step number 1, which is building the right purpose. Step number 5, which is telling a story of someone who's impacted. Quite often I add data in that as well to make it credible. And then finally, I went through step number 6, providing change assistance on the spot to be able to mobilize the change. So the entire process of building a change story and mobilizing the change within an organization can be decoded into these 8 steps. What I went through today with you were just the three most important ones. And that kind of brings me to the end of my presentation. Well, I'll let you ask any questions if you have any. So whilst some people are thinking about the question, I just do a quick summary for you. The summary was these three things that have been very insightful for me whilst doing change storytelling implementation in organizations. The very first one, building the purpose worthwhile, which makes people go, this change is going to help me survive and thrive. So I want to engage with this change. The second one was, don't give a solution to a problem that is not yet felt. And remember the difference between we are feeling creatures who can think, not thinking creatures who can feel biologically. And then finally, to mobilize the change, you must provide change assistance. Okay, I can see there's one question. The organizers, do I have the time to answer that question, or we need to move? Is it okay to answer the question? Okay, well, I'll just answer. If I need to stop, let me know. So there's a question there. What about second step and the leader's story? The second step we're talking about here is the leader's personal story with the change message. What this is that before we get into the what I have learned is that if for example, I'm the leader who's announcing change in the organization. If I start off with the organization change itself, the engagement level starts to drop. So what I have learned is to take the leader who is announcing the change and take the change message. The change message might be to become the workforce of the future, like I've said in Infineon's case. In this case, I asked Laurent to tell a story from his own life where he realized the importance of learning machine learning to be able to be successful in his career. So the point was the leader himself or herself demonstrates via a story when was it in their life that they also felt the need to change, but the change message has to be completely aligned to the organizational change. It can't be a leader's story about, that with a message that does not align with the change message of the organization. The clever segue between point 2 and 3 is always get to see our organization is also in a similar situation. So when the leader tells about his own situation, her own situation, and how they recognize their own careers or in their life, the need to have to change, what did they do? Then they bring in the organization and say, get to see it on an organizational level. We are also in a very similar situation. So that's how we connect. And the reason why we connect is because, when we like our leaders, we listen to them better, and it obviously, increases the engagement level a lot more. People get to know something personal about the leader. That's all, everybody. Thank you for your time. How do I get out of this?